previous lecture covered the basics of the anatomy and physiology of the cardiorespiratory system.
So during exercise, your body needs to
In this
increase
lecture,
the
we will
delivery of
expand
oxygen
on
to
how
the
these
working muscles.
work
But
together
it has to
to
do this
coordinate
without
direction
compromising the
to
blood
be able
flow
to
and
respond
therefore nutrient
to the
delivery to the
challenge
other
of
organs.
exercise.
In order to do this, the different systems all send their messages, which are collected at the brain. The brain then interprets these messages and responds accordingly using very precise and fine adjustments. Fortunately, this is all done automatically and we don't need to do this consciously. But let's break that down. How does the body send the signals to the brain to tell it that it needs more energy and nutrients to specific parts in order to exercise? This requires a very delicate and complicated integration of lots of different systems. But to simplify it, we'll look at it step by step. There are probably three main pathways. The body has specialized cells which monitor the environment, and if activated, these cells send a message to the brain. One example of these specialized cells are what we call baroreceptors, which are basically pressure detectors within our body. These receptors are reactive to any changes in pressure or blood pressure in this instance. In this way, if they detect any increase or decrease in blood pressure, a signal is fired off directly to the brain. There are also a group of specialized cells called chemoreceptors. These monitor and are sensitive to the chemicals within the bloods, such as the carbon dioxide levels. There are also stretch or proprioceptors, which are in the muscles and the lungs. So when the lungs expand or the muscles move, these are triggered and send direct messages to the brain. And as I indicated, this is a very complicated system, so other things like heat, or more accurately, our core body temperature also is tightly monitored and regulated to ensure that our survival and optimal performance are maintained. So once the brain receives all of these signals, it then determines whether it needs to change the inspiration or expiration. Either this is done through changing the rate or the depth of breathing, or both, so that it can alter the amount of air that's brought into the lungs and the air that's exhaled from their body to get rid of those waste products like our carbon dioxide. One of the main ways that we do this is through sending messages from the brain to the diaphragm and other respiratory muscles, which tell them that they need to work harder or faster so that we can meet these new demands on the body. As we start to increase the metabolic demands, such as happens during exercise, the ventilation increases linearly or in a direct proportion to the body's metabolic needs. In physiology, we use the term minute ventilation to describe the total amount of air that is inhaled every minute. Minute ventilation is made up of the number or the frequency of breaths multiplied by the depth or the volume, which is measured in milliliters of each of these breaths. And when we need to take more air into the body, i.e. we want to increase our minute ventilation, this can either be done through breathing more deeply or faster. When we exercise, we use both of these strategies. The initial increase in minute ventilation during exercise is accomplished by increasing the volume of our breaths. And then, once the intensity of exercise gets to hard or even strenuous, any further increases in ventilation are driven by increases in the rate of the respiration. So let's add some figures to this. At rest, the average person has a minute ventilation somewhere around 6 litres per minute. This is made up of roughly 12 breaths every minute, with each breath drawing in about half a litre of air. During heavy exercise, a healthy person increases their minute ventilation massively, reaching somewhere around 80 litres each minute, or even more. And we accomplish this by first increasing the volume, going from half a litre to about 2 litres of air per breath, and then we start to increase the rate of our breathing up to around 35 or 40 breaths each minute. And just as a note here, that 2 litres during maximal exercises of volume is roughly around 60% of what we expect the average individual's maximum lung capacity to be. So this means that even during maximal exercise, there is a large reserve in our lung capacities. So even though we may feel winded or out of breath, and therefore we stop exercising, it is usually not the ventilatory capacity that limits exercise performance in healthy individuals. So if it's not our ventilation that limits our exercise capacity, what does limit human performance? Let's look at the heart. So at rest, the heart pumps roughly 5 litres of blood around our body every minute. And when we exercise, to meet the increased demand of the oxygen, this pump speeds up and works a lot harder, and we circulate somewhere around 25 litres per minute or more. And how does the heart do this? Well, just like in the lungs, the heart can increase its output, which we call the cardiac output, by either increasing the rate or the volume. And for the heart, you remember that the volume of blood that goes through the heart every minute is what we call the stroke volume. Again, this is measured in the millilitres. And the rate that the heart beats at is our heart rate, measured in beats per minute. So increases in cardiac output are driven by either an increase in the heart rate or the volume that's being ejected from the heart, the stroke volume. First, we'll look at heart rate. What's the relationship between heart rate and exercise intensity? So this graph here plots the heart rate of 3 different individuals while they are exercising, and the intensity of that exercise is depicted once again as the oxygen uptake in litres per minute. And you can see that there's a pretty linear relationship between the two. But let's look closer at this graph. What if I told you that the data that's plotted here is from one athlete and from 2 healthy but untrained individuals? How do you know which is which? Well, it might seem intuitive that it's the blue line here that represents the athlete, because after all, the ability to have a faster maximal heart rate would mean a more efficient pump or cardiac output. But actually it's the opposite that's true, and it's this individual here with the red line that represents the athlete. And you'll notice with the athlete, at every workload, including at maximal exercise, their heart rate response is lower than the other two. This seems somewhat of a paradox, but the world's fastest athletes actually have the slowest heart rates.
You'll hopefully recognise this as a picture of Farlap, one of Australia's sporting legends. Farlap was a champion thoroughbred racehorse, and many people are convinced his victories can be attributed to the size of his heart. This is a picture of his heart, which is now on display at the National Museum in Canberra, and it weighs 6.35 kilograms, which is massive. It's about 1.5 times the weight of the average thoroughbred racehorse's heart, which should be about 3 to 4 kilograms. The increased size of the heart of athletes is actually one of the key characteristics that defines an elite athlete, and this is a phenomenon referred to as athlete's heart. To show you just how much larger the heart of an athlete gets, here are 2 side-by-side ultrasound images of the heart of a non-athlete on the left and an athlete on the right. Because of the way that these images are acquired, the ventricles are shown at the top of the screen with the atria below them, so essentially they're an upside-down love heart. But what I want to draw your attention to are these markers here, which measure 10 centimetres in depth. Using these, you can see how much larger the heart of the athlete actually is compared to the healthy individual. And it is this increased size of the athlete's heart which also explains why the heart rate is lower at rest. Having a much larger chamber of the heart allows more stroke volume, or the amount of blood which is squeezed out of the ventricle each time it contracts. So this table shows the typical stroke volumes of an athlete compared to an average untrained individual. At rest, your body needs about 5 litres a minute to be circulated through it to keep all the organs well perfused. So that 5 litres per minute in the average person is made up of a heart rate of about 60 or 70 beats per minute, and accompanied by a stroke volume which is about 70 millilitres each time the heart contracts. In contrast, the athlete who has a larger chamber and therefore a larger stroke volume ejects about 100 mils of blood each time that ventricle contracts, which means to get the same 5 litres per minute, that heart now only has to contract about 50 times. And the same holds true during maximal exercise. So that even though the maximal heart rate reached by the athlete is slightly lower than that of the untrained individual, considering that the heart is still much larger and that stroke volume is so much greater, the cardiac output during maximal exercise of the athlete is about 1.5 times that of the untrained individual. This has an amazing benefit for these athletes because clearly having a greater cardiac output allows more blood to be pumped from the heart and around the body to those muscles that really need it so that they can keep working. And also, let's not forget to clear the carbon dioxide from the system as well. So it is said that this increase in the heart size or the stroke volume is the single greatest adaptation that allows athletes to optimize their oxygen delivery and uptake.